6 chairs. That's the image. 6 empty chairs arranged around a circular table built for 7, and one man sitting alone in the center of a room that had just, in the span of 4 minutes, decided it no longer needed him. 6 chairs, not because of a trade dispute, not because of a nuclear standoff or a clash over debt ceilings or any of the geopolitical fault lines that keep analysts employed. 6 chairs because the most powerful man on earth tried to demonstrate that a multilateral institution was his personal property, and the other 6 members showed him, quietly and without raising their voices, that it was not. What you are about to understand is not a summit incident. It is not a diplomatic gaffe. It is the moment that the architecture of Western multilateralism cracked along a fault line that had been building for years, and it cracked in public, with cameras rolling in front of every head of state on earth. And the crack happened not because of what any challenger nation did, but because of what the institution's most powerful member did to itself. Mainstream coverage will give you the walkout. It will give you the photograph, the statements, the angry press conferences. What it will not give you is the mechanism, the specific logic that made every leader in that room reach the same conclusion at the same moment, the logic that Warren Buffett has described as the single most reliable way to destroy an organization in history, and the logic that now threatens every institution the Western order has built since 1945. Here is what that mechanism looks like, and here is why, once it is triggered, it cannot be untriggered. The number is 51 years. That is how long the G7 has operated as the world's most exclusive forum for economic coordination among democratic powers. 51 years of oil shocks, financial meltdowns, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the emergence of China, a global pandemic, and in all of that time, across all of those crises, the institution had never failed to produce a joint communiqué, a consensus document, proof that 7 sovereign nations, often deeply divided on policy, could nonetheless agree to appear unified in front of the world. The communiqué matters because it is not just a document, it is the signal. It tells markets, adversaries, allies, and populations that the governing coalition of the democratic world is intact, that disagreements exist inside a framework of shared purpose, that the table is still occupied. For the first time in 51 years, there was no communiqué. The table was not occupied. And the reason it wasn't is the part that every diplomat on earth is now studying, because it reveals something about institutional power that most leaders do not understand until it is too late. Let's go back to the evening before it all collapsed. The first hint that something had shifted came not at the working session table, but at the leaders' dinner the evening prior, over cocktails and the kind of informal conversations where real diplomatic work actually happens. The American president began approaching his counterparts individually with a proposition. Canada's behavior at recent summits, he suggested, had become counterproductive. Its trade posture was adversarial. Maybe the format would benefit from a restructuring of who participates. The French president's response, overheard by multiple officials and subsequently leaked to 3 separate news organizations, was a single sentence: an institution is not a reward for compliance. The Japanese prime minister offered what Japanese diplomacy is renowned for, a response so polite and so non-committal that it required a translator later to confirm to aides that it had, in fact, been a refusal. The British Prime Minister said that any change to membership would require consensus among all members, including the member being discussed. 3 approaches, 3 rejections. In any functioning multilateral relationship, that sequence ends the conversation. You floated an idea, your partners declined, the idea is shelved. That is how these institutions work. The following morning, the Canadian Prime Minister arrived at the working session 15 minutes early, accompanied by his delegation. He was met at the door by American security personnel and a White House advance team official who informed him that he would not be attending the morning session, no prior notification. No procedural mechanism invoked, no formal process of any kind, just 2 security officials and a closed door. The Canadian Prime Minister and his delegation stood in the corridor visible through the glass walls of the conference room, while the other leaders took their seats inside. And then the American president, with cameras rolling with the press pool present, because this was an open working session, turned to the 5 remaining leaders and spoke. He said that Canada had not been a productive member for some time. He said that as long as current Canadian leadership continued to undermine American economic interests, the United States saw no reason to include them. And then he said the sentence that every person in that room would spend the next 11 minutes processing. He said, "This is our table. We built it. We decide who sits at it." 3 sentences. And those 3 sentences did something that no trade dispute, no policy conflict, no bilateral disagreement had ever done in 51 years of G7 history. They changed the nature of the institution, not procedurally, not on paper, but in the minds of every leader seated at the table. Because every leader in that room heard 2 conversations happening simultaneously. They heard what was being said about Canada, and they heard what was being said about them. If this is our table, and we decide who sits at it, then your seat is not yours. It was extended to you. It can be withdrawn. You are not a sovereign partner in a multilateral framework. You are a guest at someone else's dinner party, and the host has just reminded you in front of everyone that he controls the invitation list. The French president sat for 11 minutes. His aides later described those 11 minutes as the fastest and most consequential strategic calculation in French diplomatic history. And it is worth understanding precisely what he was calculating, because it was not about Canada. France and Canada do not share a deep bilateral alliance. The French president had no particular obligation to the Canadian Prime Minister. The calculation was entirely about France, about what it meant for French sovereignty within the G7 if this moment passed without a response, about what the precedent established by accepting the exclusion said about every future session, about whether a French president who remained seated at that table after being told explicitly that the table belonged to someone else was still sitting at the G7 at all, or merely at an audience chamber for American decisions. He pushed back his chair. The sound carried across the room. He stood. He looked not at the American president, but at the 4 leaders still seated, and he said in a voice that the microphones captured clearly, "If one of us can be removed from this table by another, then none of us are here by right. We are here by permission, and I did not come here to sit at anyone's permission." He turned and walked toward the door without hurrying, without hesitation, without looking back. Germany's chancellor stood before he had reached the exit. She gathered her papers with a deliberateness that communicated not urgency but resolution, and followed. The 12 officials seated along the back wall of the German delegation rose in unison. That coordination suggested what her verbal silence confirmed. Germany's response was not improvised in the moment. Japan's prime minister stood 4 seconds later, paused at the door, turned and offered the room a slight bow, a gesture of courtesy that, in context, felt like a farewell. Italy's prime minister placed his hand briefly on the table as he rose. One Italian journalist later wrote that it looked like a man saying goodbye to something he had believed in. And then the United Kingdom, the special relationship. 80 years of strategic alignment closer than any other bilateral bond in the Western Alliance. The British Prime Minister stood, held the American president's gaze for a moment that lasted long enough for every camera in the room to capture it, and walked out. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That is how long it took to empty the table. 5 leaders, representing economies that together account for a substantial share of global output, walking through a door toward a hallway where the prime minister they had walked out to defend was waiting. And what happened in that hallway is in many ways more important than what happened in the room. They did not disperse to their suites. They did not issue individual statements. They gathered spontaneously, visibly through glass walls that every camera could see through. The Canadian Prime Minister joined them within minutes. Handshakes, warm body language, animated conversation among 6 leaders who had just done something that had never been done before. A journalist asked the Canadian Prime Minister how he felt. He looked at the 5 leaders around him, stepped to the side, physically removed himself from the center of the cluster, and said, "I'm not the story. They are." That gesture of restraint was itself a kind of statement. He understood that the moment did not belong to the bilateral dispute between Canada and the United States. It belonged to a principle, and the principle was sovereign equality. Warren Buffett, commenting on what happened, did not reach for diplomatic language. He said he had spent 70 years watching leaders make one specific mistake more reliably than any other. The mistake of believing that a coalition exists because of you rather than with you. The moment a leader treats a coalition as personal property, their meeting, their table, their right to decide who participates, they have communicated to every member that their seat is not theirs, that it belongs to the leader, that it can be reclaimed. And rational people, Buffett said, do not remain in rooms where they can be asked to leave at any moment. They leave first, or they build other rooms. He went further. You cannot unsay certain words, you cannot unbar a member and pretend the barring did not happen. You cannot unclaim ownership of a multilateral institution. The words, "This is our table," now exist. Every leader on earth has heard them, and every leader is now making the same calculation. If the United States claims the right to decide who sits at the G7, it claims the right to decide who sits at NATO, who participates in intelligence sharing, who accesses the dollar-based financial architecture. The precedent does not apply only to Canada, it applies to everyone. His conclusion was 8 words: you can dominate a room or fill it. The summit's remaining sessions were canceled. Within 72 hours, the 6 leaders who had gathered in that hallway were on a call together discussing the future of the format. The options under discussion were not marginal adjustments, a rotating chair structure to prevent any single nation from controlling proceedings, an expansion of the group to include additional democracies, diluting the dominance of any one member, or the option that sent the sharpest signal to Washington, proceeding as a group of 6 without the United States until the question of multilateral equality is resolved. The joint informal statement that emerged from that call was signed by France, Germany, Japan, Italy, the United Kingdom, and Canada. 6 nations affirming sovereign equality as the non-negotiable foundation of multilateral cooperation. The United States was not asked to sign. The photograph of the empty table was projected onto buildings in 3 European capitals. It appeared on magazine covers with a single-word headline. It was shared by heads of state in India, Brazil, South Africa, nations that are not members of the G7 but that are watching very carefully and drawing their own conclusions about the reliability of American-led frameworks. The number to hold on to is not 51. The number is 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That is how long it took for the world's most durable alliance structure, the Western Democratic Forum, that has shaped global economic governance since 1975, to go from 7 members to 1. 3 minutes and 40 seconds to establish that 5 sovereign democracies are willing to accept institutional disruption in defense of the principle that makes their participation in any institution rational. That principle is simple. Your seat is yours, not because a more powerful partner grants it, not because you comply with a larger ally's preferences, but because you are a sovereign nation and sovereignty does not require permission. The question every leader is now sitting with in capitals from Seoul to Canberra to New Delhi to Ottawa to Brussels is the same question. If the institution that was built to anchor Western democratic cooperation can be emptied in under 4 minutes, which institutions can't be? And the answer to that question is being worked out right now. Not in public, not in press conferences, but in the conversations that matter, the quiet calls between chancelleries, the diplomatic cables that don't get leaked, the infrastructure of alternative arrangements that gets built, not in a day, but in a series of small decisions, each of which looks unremarkable until you step back and see what they are assembling. What happened at that summit was not a disruption. A disruption implies a temporary departure from normal function. What happened was a demonstration proof of concept that the table can be walked away from, and once that proof exists, the table is never quite the same again. The president tried to remove one member, he emptied the room. He tried to show that American power defines who participates in Western institutions. He showed that American behavior can make those institutions unnecessary. He tried to punish defiance. He gave 5 other nations a reason to join it, and they needed less than 4 minutes to decide. The room is empty. One man sat at a table designed for 7, surrounded by 6 flags whose leaders were in a hallway talking to each other, figuring out what comes next. And what comes next is the story that no one is covering yet, because it is not being built at summits, it is being built in the space that the empty table created. Subscribe now. These developments move every day, and the next shift in this architecture may not announce itself in advance. The photograph of an empty table is worth understanding, not for what it shows, for what it proves. that the most consequential sentence in recent multilateral history was not spoken by a president claiming ownership of the world's most exclusive forum. It was spoken by the leader who stood up, looked at the people still seated, and reminded them that no one sits anywhere by permission, least of all them,